All right, so today we're diving deep into Stranger Things. You guys sent in a ton of research articles, even some production notes. We're not just talking about what happens in the show, but like why the show has just blown up, why it's become this like cultural
And
phenomenon.
more than just a show, it's interesting how it's tapped into this kind of collective nostalgia, even for people who weren't alive in the 80s. There's something about the way it blends entertainment and these like deeper reflections on
Yeah,
culture and stuff.
exactly. Like one article you sent mentioned dislocated nostalgia, which is basically like feeling nostalgic for a time you didn't even live through. But before we go too far, just a really quick recap. Stranger Things is set in the 1980s in Hawkins, Indiana. Small town, and then bam, kid disappears.
Will Byers. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. The show just does this brilliant job of layering in sci-fi horror mystery. It's like Spielberg and Stephen King had a baby, and then somebody sprinkled in some Goonies.
I love that. That's such a good description. So Will's friends are trying to find him. And then we meet Eleven, who has escaped from this like shady government lab. And she has these psychokinetic powers. And suddenly we're not just dealing with a missing kid case. We've got like government conspiracies, this alternate dimension called the Upside Down.
Oh, yeah. Full of demogorgons.
And those things are terrifying.
Yeah, and even with all that, all the monsters and the dark themes,
Yeah.
it never loses that, like, you know,
Heart.
heart. Yeah. Like, it's about friendship. It's about the resilience of these kids, like, just in the face of unimaginable stuff.
And, speaking of resilience, he sent over all this research about adolescent development, and it's really interesting because it seems like the show is capturing something. Even with all the supernatural stuff, it's capturing something about like what it's like to be a kid, to be a teenager, to go through those years.
Absolutely. It speaks to that universal experience of adolescence, that
Mhm.
feeling of being like on the precipice of the unknown,
Uh-huh.
trying to figure out who you are, where you belong, and Eleven embodies that so perfectly.
Yeah, let's talk about Eleven. Her journey is fascinating. She starts with these incredible powers, but she really just wants what so many of us take for granted, like connection,
Yeah.
a sense of belonging.
She's this extraordinary character, dropped into like an ordinary world.
Hmm.
And the way her story unfolds, it's constantly revealing new layers, not just about her powers, but also about her identity. It just keeps you,
Hooked.
hooked. Yeah.
And that ties back into what we were saying about that dislocated nostalgia. She's longing for this past. She never even had a normal childhood, just like some viewers might be drawn to the 80s even if they didn't live through them. It's like we're all searching for something we've lost, this like simpler time or
It's a
something.
powerful idea, this longing for a past that maybe never even existed,
Yeah.
but it represents something that I think we all crave.
Okay, enough theory. Let's get down to like some behind the scenes stuff. You found some really interesting production notes, right?
Oh, yeah, tons of cool stuff. Like, did you know that they originally planned to film in Long Island? Can you imagine Hawkins with a New York backdrop? It's funny because, like, in one of the early drafts of the pilot script,
Yeah.
they actually mentioned the proximity to New York City. But I guess
East Coast winters.
yeah, weren't really what they were going for.
They wanted that hazy summer vibe, and they found it in Atlanta, Georgia. But here's what blew my mind. Apparently, 95% of the interiors of the Wheeler and Byers houses were practical effects. No green screens. That's some serious dedication.
That's fascinating. It goes beyond just the visuals. Like this emphasis on practical effects, it actually reflects a deeper creative choice. I was reading this interview with the Duffers, and they talk about wanting the actors to really feel immersed in the environment, to experience the claustrophobia of the upside down, like firsthand.
So it wasn't just about making it look real. It was about making it feel real for everyone involved.
Exactly.
Which makes sense given how the show is constantly blurring the lines between the ordinary and the extraordinary.
Exactly. And they didn't skimp on equipment either. The production notes mention these top-of-the-line cameras, like the REI Alexa LF and the Red Epic Dragon, which, explains that cinematic quality.
Yeah. And let's not forget the music. So iconic, instantly transports you back to the 80s. Those synth sounds by Michael Stein and Kyle Dixon from the band Survive. It's just become synonymous with the show.
It captures that eerie, otherworldly vibe perfectly, just adds another layer to that immersive quality.
So we've got this blend of genres, top-notch production, this deeply relatable story. It's no wonder it's such a sensation. But what about the people behind it, the Duffers themselves? What's their creative process like?
From what I've read, the Duffer Brothers wear a lot of hats. They created the show, obviously. But they're also writers, directors, and executive producers. That level of involvement is pretty rare. And it probably explains why the show feels so cohesive.
Okay, so they're basically the masterminds behind the entire Stranger Things universe. How'd they even come up with this wild concept in the first place?
The production notes mention that they were heavily influenced by the works of Stephen King, Steven Spielberg, John Carpenter, which, explains that blend of horror, sci-fi, and adventure.
Right, it's like they took the best elements of all those iconic filmmakers and created something totally new and fresh.
Exactly. But they also drew inspiration from, real-life events, like the Montauk Project, which involved these alleged government experiments with psychic abilities.
Wait, so there might be some truth lurking beneath the fiction. That's creepy.
It adds another layer to the show's mystique, for sure.
Okay, so we've talked about the show's influences, the creators, the production values. Clearly a lot of thought and care went into creating this world. But what about the impact it's had on our world? That's something I'm really interested in exploring.
Oh, Stranger Things has definitely gone beyond entertainment. It's become a cultural touchstone. I think we can dive deeper into that in the next part of our deep dive. Ready to explore the cultural impact of Hawkins?
Absolutely. I can't wait to unpack how this show has influenced everything, from fashion to music to our understanding of the 80s.
Okay, so we talk about how Stranger Things is this amazing blend of storytelling, awesome production quality, and these characters you can't help but love. But it's also sparked this huge cultural phenomenon. It's everywhere.
Oh, it's true. You see it in fashion and music. Even in the way we talk about the 80s now. One of the articles you sent me actually dives into this. It's pretty fascinating. It argues that Stranger Things didn't just revive 80s nostalgia, it practically reinvented it.
Yeah, suddenly everyone's rocking bomber jackets and leg warmers again. But it's more than just clothes. It's the music, the movies, even those old arcade games are making a comeback.
Oh, yeah. Remember when arcades were the place to be? Stranger Things tapped right into that. And now it's we're all experiencing this collective flashback, even if we weren't there the first time around. It's that dislocated nostalgia we were talking about. I get it now. I wasn't alive in the 80s. But I still feel this weird connection to it through the show. It's like these secondhand memories or something.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting. It makes you think about how media shapes our understanding of the past, even a past we didn't experience firsthand. And it makes you wonder why the 80s in particular have such a strong grip on our imaginations.
Well, the show makes the 80s seem pretty cool, even with the whole, Demogorgons on the loose thing. Is it just this yearning for a simpler time, before the internet and social media took over our lives?
That's definitely part of it.
Yeah.
That article you shared connects this 80s revival to a growing anxiety about our hyper-connected world. People are craving those face-to-face interactions, that freedom of exploring your neighborhood on a bike.
Yeah.
Without a phone in your hand. Stranger Things captures that beautifully.
You know what else struck me? The show's portrayal of the 80s, it doesn't shy away from the social issues of the time. There are these subtle nods to changing gender roles, attitudes towards sexuality.
That's a good point. The show isn't just some rose-tinted recreation of the past. It acknowledges the complexities, the challenges that people faced back then, even while it's celebrating that sense of community and adventure.
It's a reminder that the 80s, like any era, had its light and shadow. And maybe that's why it resonates so much with us today. We're also dealing with complex issues, trying to find our way in a world that's constantly changing.
Right. It's almost like the show is holding up a mirror to our own time, using the 80s as a lens to explore these timeless themes, identity, belonging, the struggle between good and evil.
Yeah, that reminds me of something else the research mentioned, this idea that Stranger Things is popular, not just because it's set in the 80s, but because it reflects our anxieties about the future.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like the Cold War paranoia, the fear of government overreach, the threat of nuclear annihilation. These were all very real fears back then. And they're finding echoes in our present-day anxieties about climate change, political polarization, technological advancements.
It's like the show is tapping into this collective unconscious, reminding us that history often repeats itself, even if the monsters change their form. And that brings us back to 11. She's not just battling monsters from the upside down. She is fighting against these forces that want to control her, to exploit her power. It's a metaphor for how a lot of people feel. Powerless in the face of larger institutions, societal pressures.
And yet she finds strength in her connections, in the friendships she forms, which is a really powerful message, especially for young people who might be feeling lost, overwhelmed by the world around them.
Absolutely. The show reminds us that even when things are really dark, human connection can be a source of hope and resilience. That's a message that goes beyond any particular era, a cultural context.
So we've covered the nostalgia, the social commentary, the deeper themes. Was there anything else you found in your research about the show's cultural impact?
One thing that stood out to me was its influence on the entertainment industry. It's revived this interest in genre storytelling, particularly in sci-fi and horror.
Oh, yeah. There's been this explosion of shows and movies with those 80s-inspired vibes. Like everyone's trying to capture a bit of that Stranger Things magic.
Exactly. But it's not just about imitation. The show has really pushed boundaries. It's demonstrated that audiences want stories that are entertaining, but also thought-provoking.
And it's paved the way for more diverse storytelling, too, with characters from marginalized communities taking center stage. That's something I really appreciate about the show.
Definitely. Stranger Things has helped to shift the cultural landscape, making space for stories that reflect the richness and complexity of our world.
Speaking of the future, have the Duffers spilled any secrets about where the Stranger Things universe is headed next? You mentioned a spin-off series earlier.
Yeah, they confirmed that a spinoff is in development, but they've been super tight-lipped about the details. What's interesting, though, is that they said it won't feature any of the original characters.
Wait, so no 11, no Dustin, no Steve? That's bold. I mean, those characters are a huge part of why people love the show. Aren't they worried about alienating fans?
It's a risk, for sure. But in one of the interviews, they talked about wanting to expand the Stranger Things universe, to explore new stories and new characters within that world.
So it's like they're building a whole mythology, a multi-layered world that can support multiple narratives.
Exactly. And that's becoming more and more popular. Look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or the Star Wars franchise. Creating these interconnected worlds lets storytellers keep audiences engaged, but it also lets them take risks and explore new possibilities.
So we might see new towns, new monsters, maybe even new dimensions. The possibilities are endless.
Exactly. That's what makes it so exciting. The Duffers have created something really special, and it seems like they're just getting started.
Okay, so we've got the spin-off. But what about the main storyline? Any hints about how it all ends in the final season?
They've been pretty secretive about that, too. But they have said that it will tie up loose ends, answer some of those lingering questions, and offer a satisfying conclusion to the characters' journeys.
I'm excited and terrified to see how it all wraps up. I'm going to need a whole box of tissues for that finale.
Me too. But before we get too caught up in speculating about the future, let's appreciate what we've learned about Stranger Things so far. It's more than just a show. It's captured our imaginations, sparked all these conversations, and reminded us of the power of storytelling.
You know, going through all this research with you has really deepened my appreciation for the show. It's amazing how much thought and detail went into every aspect of it.
Oh, and we haven't even talked about the animated series that's in development. I'm really curious to see how they translate that Stranger Things vibe into animation.
Yeah, me too. That opens up a whole new world of possibilities. But we'll save that discussion for another time. For now, I think it's time to shift our focus to the bigger picture, the enduring legacy of Stranger Things, and what it tells us about ourselves.
I agree. Let's explore how the show reflects our desires, our fears, and our fascination with the unknown.
Okay, so we've talked about like the show's impact on culture and stuff, but what about the deeper stuff, the things that like stay with you, even after you finish watching an episode?
Right. It goes beyond just entertainment. It really taps into those like primal human needs, like connection, that urge to understand the unknown, even if the unknown is a terrifying demogorgon.
Yeah, for sure. I was reading about Eleven and her search for belonging, and it made me think about all those times in my life when I felt like an outsider. That feeling of being different and just wanting to fit in. Everyone can relate to that.
Absolutely. And Stranger Things takes those universal experiences and amplifies them through this sci-fi lens. It's like this heightened reflection of our own struggles with identity, fear, the search for meaning.
And it's interesting how the show plays with this idea of nostalgia, too. We've talked about the 80s setting and everything, but it's like the characters and maybe even the viewers are looking back at their pasts, trying to find answers in their memories.
You know, that reminds me of something one of the research papers mentioned. It argued that Stranger Things is so powerful because it captures this very specific kind of nostalgia, not just for a time period, but for a time in our lives when everything felt possible, when the world was full of wonder and mystery.
I remember those days, spending hours exploring the woods behind my house, building forts with my friends, like we were on our own adventures, just like the kids in Hawkins.
Exactly, and Stranger Things reminds us that. Even as adults, we can still tap into that sense of wonder, that curiosity about the world. It encourages us to embrace the unknown, even if it's a little scary.
And that's where the horror comes in, right? The Demogorgon, the Mind Flayer, that creepy atmosphere of the Upside Down. It's terrifying, but also like weirdly compelling.
It's like the show is saying, Hey, there are things out there we don't understand, forces beyond our control. But it's also showing us that, even when we're scared, we can find courage. We can fight back. We can overcome.
And we do that by relying on each other, right? The friendships in Stranger Things are so powerful. Like, they literally save the world.
Exactly. It's a testament to the power of human connection. It's a reminder that we're stronger together, that we need each other to face our fears and navigate this crazy thing called life.
Looking back on all the stuff we've talked about today, it's amazing how much Stranger Things has to offer. It's this perfect storm of entertainment and nostalgia, social commentary, and these deeper philosophical questions.
It's a show that invites multiple interpretations, each viewer bringing their own experiences and perspectives. That's part of what makes it so rich and rewarding.
It's like a conversation starter for all these different topics, like childhood friendships, government conspiracies, even the nature of reality.
I think that's a great point. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. What is it about Stranger Things that resonates most with you? What does it make you think about? What questions does it raise in your mind?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's the reminder that even when things are dark and uncertain, there's always hope. There's always the possibility of connection and redemption.
That's beautifully said.
Well,
And on that note, I want to thank you for bringing all this incredible source material. It's been such a joy exploring the world of Stranger Things with you.
likewise. And to you, the listener, we hope you've gained some new insights into the show, its creators, and maybe even yourself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.